Great. So let's jump in. It's just Max and I this week for the Space Goat podcast. So we have the chance to talk a bit more about cameras and some more visual stuff, which is always nice. No offense to Sam. But yeah, let's jump into it. So Max, I think this week we were going to talk about filmmaking versus photography. And I think a lot of
Yes.
people automatically assume that they're one and the same, but you and I obviously know that not to be true. Obviously, I've always had a bit more of a
Mm.
filmmaking background, and you've always been a bit more photography centric.
Yeah. Obviously, they kind of go hand in hand in some ways. But if being a good photographer doesn't mean you're going to be a good filmmaker, and likewise, obviously.
Yeah, I think the key thing that someone would always point out is what's called an eye for composition. I think if you have this sort of, it's the same thing that you see on Instagram where you see people who take really nice Instagram photos but have not necessarily had any kind of training or experience in filmmaking or photography, but they can get an idea of what might look nice for a photo. It's the
Yeah,
same thing really for filmmaking and photography, but obviously in slightly different mediums, whereas filmmaking you're looking to create something that has movement and is constantly in flux, whereas photography is about potentially capturing that singular moment in the best light.
yeah, yeah. That pretty much sums it up. That's the podcast done. um, um, yeah, I guess the main difference is like, um, obviously taking a video is a series of images in a way, and you've got to think of it in a completely different way. And even the way the camera works is completely different. You can use flash on photography, which is the main thing, which kind of gives you a lot more flexibility than video does, because you tend to need a lot more physical like light for video. That's why you see the massive like sweaty lights on film sets, whereas in photography you can get away with just a little flash, which outputs loads of light but in a really short period of time, um, which is means you get more flexibility on set, but that obviously doesn't translate to video.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were chatting before we started the podcast. I've recently had to start doing a bit more photography for some work that I've been doing, and I think the hardest part for me has been figuring out what the rest of the shutter modes are really for, because obviously with filmmaking I'm mainly switching between something like 25 FPS and occasionally switching up to 60 or 120 or maybe even 240, in which case I'm looking to obviously potentially double my shutter, just to capture more movement. But when you're dealing with photography, it's a whole new ball game, because you're potentially looking at whacking your shutter up to ridiculous numbers, which I've never had to use before. And it sort of puts your, just adjusting camera settings for lighting is a completely
Yeah,
different ball game than when using it for filmmaking.
yeah, definitely. And with filmmaking, you can kind of often like see what you're doing, if that makes sense. But you can like you've got the whole other aspect of the shutter speed, like you said, with the photography, which means if it's too bright, like no, too dark in a scene, you can like make daylight out of nowhere just by sticking it on a tripod and opening the shutter for longer, which you can't do at all with video. You have to have a bigger light or a crazy camera that can have crazy ISO.
Definitely. It almost feels like I'm cheating in a way sometimes just by whacking up the shutter. I'm like, where's the compromise going to be? Obviously, when you're whacking up your exposure, your ISO in camera, the more you do it, the more grain you're going to get in your image. And likewise, obviously, the more f-stops, more aperture you're putting into your image, the less depth of field that you're going to get. So it's weird to have a setting on a camera that's going to give you something with no compromise, really, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, it's kind of one thing I'm after however many years of doing photography, um, starting to appreciate using light and how it actually works. It's one of those things that I thought I knew when I'd been doing it for like 2 or 3 years, but now I'm only realizing I didn't know anything, and I've still got loads to learn.
Mm. Yeah, I think the other thing, bringing it more into the actual photo editing,
Yeah,
is there's a lot, whilst the actual process of taking the photo is easier, in terms of when it comes to edit that photo, there's actually a lot more that you have to do
Yeah.
to photos than you might necessarily have to do to footage. And I think that's where the steepest learning curve has come in, and the realization that actually I can't just take a nice photo and then give that to a client. It has to have so many different things done to it before I can even say that it's good to go. And that's been a Photoshop has always been something I've kind of played with but never really given some serious time to. The same with Lightroom. And there's a lot of elements that are easy to pick up, like the color grading aspects, but in terms of masking things and, strategically adding drop shadows, creating, hue adjustments and different effects, and it's something completely new, and it probably takes up 99% of the time of that project more than once, which is a very different type of content creation for me.
Yeah, that's another thing that I've only recently, probably this year, started to appreciate is that like they say when you take a photo, you don't just take it once. Like taking the photo is half of the work. You take the photo, then you take it into Photoshop or whatever, and then you make the photo. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's not like cheating or anything. That's something that goes way back to even film days, where you would like take a photo, get it developed, and then as you're, I don't know that much about it because I've not that experience with film, but from what I understand, the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop come from when you would physically burn, like, or heat up or like underexpose separate parts of an image to try and brighten one thing and darken another, and that's something that people did still do with film photography.
Yeah. Well, they say, don't they, film is the highest resolution. So,
Yeah.
There's a lot you can actually do to film that you'd never be able to get away with digital footage, and kind of vice versa as well in some aspects. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said about that. And the actual process of physically editing something is kind of intriguing, and it's something that we weren't taught, at school or university. Something
No,
I'd
I
quite
was a
like
little
to.
bit.
Yeah, I'd be quite keen to actually go back and have a go at it, but
Well, it's just
maybe
interesting
sometime in the
because
future.
you think photo editing is a digital thing and that it can only be done on a computer, and that it's like some people think it's cheating, but it's not a new thing at all, and it's been around like way before computers existed. It's just been a part of photography as long as the cameras have existed, really, editing it.
So I've been keen to get your insight into, because obviously I mentioned about Instagram earlier,
Yeah.
and a lot of Instagram content, especially the sort of the popular content, is actually taken using smartphones nowadays. There's not too much that's actually taken with cameras, and it brings into question actually, if you're, working as a content creator, for example, for any kind of company, where's the actual need to have a camera for photography in a lot of those settings? Do you think you could be a content creator and just use your phone?
Yeah, in a way, but I think it's going to limit you. Obviously, they're getting better and better and better, but we're still not at a point where, unless you were purposely, there's these tests online where there's like, this is a phone picture and this is a camera picture. Can you tell the difference? But they're like really specific tests that have been made to make it difficult to tell the difference. Like in real life, when you're taking a photo with a phone, it's just not going to look as good. Like, it's a physics problem. The sensor on a phone is tiny and the lenses aren't that good compared to a real camera. And you can really tell the difference when it's used at proper professional gear as opposed to a phone.
Yeah, there was there was a project I was working on the other day, and one of the guys came to me and told me they'd previously recorded something on their iPhone, using the super slow motion function that you now get on most smartphones, and they're always used as part of the advertising campaigns of look how this super slow mo, that the iPhone or the Samsungs can produce, and it's quite interesting because he came to me and said, "This looks awful. How can I fix it?" And I opened up the settings on the iPhone, because I haven't actually used the slow mo on the iPhone.
Yeah.
I've used it briefly on the Samsung, but yeah, not on the iPhone. And I opened it up and put it into the settings, and it just gives you nothing to work with. You just get whatever the camera is seeing and whatever the camera decides are the right settings for that image. That's what's baked in. You can't change it. There's nothing you can do, because the slow motion, I guess, is so advanced for that specific sensor and chip in the phone that it's not going to give you the ability to actually change what it wants to do. So it brings into question, firstly for me, those images that you see on TV when they show those super slow-mo moments, I know that they're probably not allowed to use something else to show those, in terms of Ofcom and
Yeah.
everything, but they just don't look real. So in the end, we came up with a solution with using a GoPro Hero 7, which can record at the same FPS as the newest iPhones, at 240. And, at least with that, we were limited to HD to 1080, but we could still change all of our shutter speed. We could change the ISO. We could change the color. We could change pretty much everything, and that ultimately led us to have a better result in the end than using the phone. So it was another situation. Even though a GoPro is not seen by many as a professional camera in a sense, it still served a better purpose than the phone in that circumstance, because we had the flexibility of being able to edit what we were working with.
Yeah. And that definitely makes a difference. Sometimes the phone doesn't always know what's best in terms of settings and whatnot. That's kind of got me thinking. One thing that you can do to make your phone footage look really good is have proper lighting, and make sure your lighting is just as good as if you're using any professional camera. I'm in a couple of food photography groups on Facebook, and some people start off just using their phone, but they have really a good understanding of lighting, and that's what makes a big difference to anything. Having good slow mo, that can look good on an iPhone if it's lit nicely, and slow mo obviously needs a lot of light, so that's quite challenging, and that's why it often doesn't look very good.
Yeah, and this is one of the other problems that we actually ran into, was they were using overhead ceiling lights
Oh yeah,
for slow mo, and he showed me
they
this
flicker.
footage. Oh yeah, like it was like the most intense epileptic episode you've ever seen. It was awful, and of course, I just sort of said, well, you need to have a constant light in there and the ability to change your shutter so you can sort of intertune it a bit more with any kind of flicker. And obviously, they didn't know anything about that. And again, the iPhone, you can't change any of that. And now a lot of cameras actually have smart shutters where it can actually read the frequency of lighting and tell you what kind of shutter speed you need to be on to match that. You even have devices now which you can plug into a camera which auto sync to those. So it's another thing that pushes the points towards professional camera setups and professional lighting.
Yeah, and I guess anyone who's skilled enough to be able to light a scene properly so that it looks good even on an iPhone or a GoPro is going to be able to take that a step further and make it even better using a proper camera, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. There was a camera actually that I saw the other day. I can't remember what it was called. Was it the Chronos? Yeah, I think it was the Chronos. It can record in 1050 FPS at 720p. I think it can record in 1000 FPS at HD, which is mad to begin with, and it
Yeah.
only costs about £4,000,
Oh, really?
which is,
That's
I mean,
cool.
when you put it in perspective, the Phantom Flex, I think retails anywhere, aren't they about 15,000 and up?
Uh, I thought they were in the hundreds of thousands.
I think that's the
Because they
the
don't make many
super.
of them at all. Well,
No,
the top of the
no,
line ones.
no. I know Gavin's obviously he gets them. I'm not sure if he gets a discount on them. Um,
We just
I
rents
imagine
them, I
he.
think.
I think he owns one of them.
That's weird that you mentioned that. I can't remember where I read it, but apparently we're talking about Gavin Free of the Slow
Yes.
Mo guys. Um, he got his career by basically saying, "Oh, not many people specialize in slow mo camera operator." So he trained himself to become a slow mo camera operator, and they are really in demand because it's quite a niche skill to be able to
Yeah.
understand that properly. So he's loads of big films he'd done camera work for. Ended up doing like pretty young in his career.
Yeah, I think he got really lucky. Didn't he have a mentor that took him on, who
I don't
kind of
know.
was? I think he had a mentor um, that already was kind of doing some slow mo stuff, and he took Gavin on, um, and then he just got really really lucky. Managed
Yeah,
to land some incredible roles. I think some of the most notable ones was the second Sherlock Holmes film, the scene
yeah,
where they're running through the forest. And they're being shot at by all the guns. That's all filmed
oh yeah, and the
by Gavin.
Judge Dredd, that film,
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
really good.
yeah. That was really good. Yeah, and now, see, that's an interesting one I'd like to put to you as well. Like now, how much of that do you think would be CGI? Because obviously you can create when you're digitally creating an asset, you can
Yeah,
set the frame rate at whatever you want it to be, and I suppose cost wise there must be some scenes that would be cheaper to create digitally than to rent, crew just for a slow mo sequence.
I don't know. Would it? It might not be cheaper.
Suppose it depends on the
Like
scene
a
itself.
post house is like 5 or 6 people plus render time plus everything
Mm,
else.
yeah.
Um, but like practical effects always look better if you can pull it off.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. Well,
Most
look at
producers,
Mandalorian.
yeah, I haven't seen that actually.
You haven't
Need to
seen
watch it.
Mandalorian?
No, I've
Oh,
watched like the
no.
first episode and I quite liked it.
I think Mandalorian is probably the perfect personification of why practical effects. But then
Yeah,
saying the new
yeah,
Star
yeah.
Wars films were marketed on having practical effects and they didn't exactly poll well with the public, I suppose.
I suppose. Oh, yeah. I've had Disney Plus for like 4 months, and we watched Frozen 2 on it, and then I completely forgot to cancel it. So
Oh dear.
that's it. That's all I've watched on
Yeah,
it. So I'll definitely get the Mandalorian.
I
Get
mean
my money's
Disney are
worth.
just they are masters of marketing. I was fully under the impression that when I bought Disney Plus, I would have The Mandalorian, all the new Disney Marvel shows, um, but I'm now almost a year into my subscription, and I'm just onto the second season of Mandalorian, and I still haven't seen. They still haven't launched a Marvel standalone show, so they're basically keeping people on the hook, and I feel like this is going to become a consistent thing of just sort of giving you
Yeah,
content in eeks and drabs, so you have to
it's a bit
hold
cheaper
on.
compared to the other ones, though, isn't it?
It is, but let's be honest, I think it's more of a case of you're not going to choose Disney Plus over something like Netflix. You're probably going to end up with Netflix
Oh,
and Disney
think I've lost you.
Plus. Oh, can you hear me? Hello? Let me save this pod. Let me press record. Sam, the podcast cut out at that point. We lost connection, so we're just going to sort of pick up on a similar subject, and you can cut it in wherever you feel like it, or you can just fade out and fade it back in, however you feel like it. Soz. So on the topic of Disney, and we mentioned Marvel briefly. I wanted to get your opinion because this is a massive thing that runs at the heart of filmmaking, the filmmaking community, and it's kind of like a Marmite situation where you either love it or you hate it, and I feel like a lot of it's down to, you get these self-righteous filmmakers who are of the opinion that unless it's got a budget of less than 20p, it's not real art. Um, and obviously there's a lot of argument that's been made that Disney have monopolized the film industry and they're not making, I think there was a good wisecrack video that launched the other day that was talking about how Disney's killing is a cancer on culture, which is a pretty extreme sentence, but it held a lot of weight when you heard the argument put forward. And I wanted to get your opinion on whether you think that what Disney's doing with the films they're creating is damaging to the filmmaking industry.
Does that video talk about their influence on copyright law?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, because I haven't seen that video, but I know that most of copyright law basically exists because of Disney lobbying the US government, and then as a result the world kind of followed suit because the US created a lot of the world's entertainment, which is why the copyright rule for works belonging to the public domain is something like 80 years, isn't it, after the original
something
author
like
dies.
Yeah, that's why we've got like so many Lego knockoffs as well, because patents expire and copyrights can expire and come up for renew.
Yeah, I've heard arguments for that being a big not Disney's films themselves, but their influence in lobbying actual law to make work not be able to go into the public and having it really tight under lock, copyright and whatnot. How that influences culture.
Yeah, one thing it also talked about was this idea that obviously a lot of these original fairy tales, by the Brothers Grimm and all these other influential writers of the time, how a lot of their stories were actually quite cold, with some pretty dark messages to blackmail and guilt children into behaving better and not making silly mistakes. In The Little Mermaid, I think she ends up turning into sea foam, and she doesn't get the prince, and the prince doesn't like her.
Oh God!
And I think there's all. It's pretty much the same for a lot of them. I think Sleeping Beauty, it's Cinderella. The stepsisters cut their toes off so they can, fit their feet into the glass slipper,
God,
and they end up filling them with blood. So there's Snow White. Snow White's probably the worst one. It's the first.
Where are you going with this?
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying that Snow White was the worst one. So Snow White, True Love's kiss didn't work. So they thought that the only way to get true love's kiss is through a mother and daughter bond. So the prince, did his thing, and when Snow White's baby was born and gave her a kiss on the cheek, that was what broke the curse. Or maybe that was Sleeping Beauty. No, that was Sleeping Beauty. But anyway, it doesn't really matter what story it was. The fact that Disney, chose to take that and turn it into something completely different and family friendly. It was Wisecrack had this idea that potentially is damaging on culture, because you're just totally retelling someone else's story just to, and you're giving it a U rating. But then the fairy tales are obviously one thing, and Marvel is another. And what we've seen in the last sort of decade is this total monopolization of the blockbuster, the summer blockbuster, and it does definitely feel like most trips to the cinema now for a lot of families are dominated by Disney content. Yeah. Whether it's the latest Pixar film, the Marvel film, the Star Wars film, just a Disney standalone story, it does feel like they've just completely monopolized the cinema industry, and the only other reason to get to the cinema is for the occasional one-off film that's not Disney, and it's something so different, like a Tarantino movie or a Christopher Nolan movie. But the fact is that it does feel a lot like it's just blockbusters that we're going to the cinema for now. And the hurtful thing about that is that it now feels like the only way we're getting true expressionist content is through TV, through things like big series on HBO or BBC or even Netflix. But that content's not making it to the cinema anymore, which is kind of worrying.
Yeah, I mean, some cinemas are doing that. Probably just comes down to price of tickets. I found that some cinemas when they have really cheap tickets, like £5 tickets, and even if it's for a weird film that you've never heard of, I'd go to the cinema a lot more, and I'd end up enjoying that quite a lot actually. But I think more stuff like that can definitely combat what you're saying. It just comes down to price. If you're going to pay for like your whole family to go to the cinema, you may as well make sure it's something everyone's going to like, which is probably a film made by Disney.
Yeah, yeah. But then at the same time, you got to question, how much are people spending on Disney Plus,
Yeah.
Netflix, Amazon Prime, their TV license, their TV, powering their TV. I wonder what those prices actually come out as.
Well, I don't know if you saw the news. We should probably wrap up soon, but I don't know if you saw the news recently that Warner Brothers have decided to put all their films next year, all their big blockbuster films, they're releasing it in cinemas and on demand at the same time.
Yeah, now this is obviously a popularised
So that's kind of the opposite of what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it's obviously off the back of COVID, where studios are in a position where they've got films, they want to have them, get them made, but the problem they have is actually distributing them, because cinemas are obviously a close quarters environment, and it's quite difficult to fit multiple people into a cinema without breaching, social distancing. And
I think the studios got spooked by Tenet.
Yeah,
didn't do very well.
Yeah, it didn't at all. Even Onward, the Pixar film, didn't do very well because people couldn't go out to see it. But what we've now seen is that with the launch of Disney Plus, Onward's actually done really well. And again, I know we're talking about Disney, which is, I'm kind of making out to be the enemy here, which is totally not true. I will sit and watch Disney films, 3 days a week, non-stop, back to back, and be totally content with my decision-making process. But it's more a case of, what is going to be the future, and are we as filmmakers having to change what we're making in order to fit with these kind of blockbuster and monopolized demands of the Disney feel-good, formula. But yeah, we'll leave it there, because I think that's definitely something to ponder and to reflect on. And we can
change our subject a little bit there.
We did, but House of Mouse, they're in your brain. Cool. So thanks for joining me, Max. If you were interested by any of the ideas we spoke about today, feel free to get in touch and ask us any questions you have, or if you're curious to see what kind of content we're producing. I can't promise it's on the same level as Disney, but it might still be enjoyable for some.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day. You can check us out on our website, spacegoat.media, or you can drop us an email at hello@spacegoat.media, and we'll see you for the next one. So thank you, Max.
Thank you.